Hello everybody, this is Kate at the Library Whispers, and I thought today, since it's coffee time, that I would take another look at this really lovely book. I've already done a video of this book, but it was more a kind of casual flip through really, and didn't really do a lot of reading, so I thought, while I have coffee, this is my Irish cream coffee, it's very nice. I thought that we could do some reading. So for those who don't already know, this is a reproduction of a book that was produced by John Thomson in, let me see the date, 1877. It was produced in 12 monthly parts under the title Street Life in London. So it says Street Life in London by J. Thomson, FRGS, and Adolph Smith, with permanent photographic illustrations taken from life expressly for this publication. London, Sampson Low, Marston, Sew and Rivington, Crown Buildings, 188 Fleet Street, London. So let's have a read of, let's read London Cabmen. And this amazing photograph. Okay. This old question is assuming a new phase. There is no better abused set of men in existence than the London cabmen. But recent events and disclosures have helped, at least in part, to remove the blame from their shoulders and attribute it to those who, in this matter, are the real enemies of the public interest. Despite the traditional hoarse voice, rough appearance and quarrelsome tone, cab drivers are as a rule reliable and honest men, who can boast of having fought the battle of life in an earnest, persevering, and creditable manner. Let me take, for instance, the career, as related by himself, of the cab driver, who furnishes the subject of the accompanying illustration. He began life in the humble capacity of pot boy in his uncle's public house, but abandoned this opening in consequence of a dispute, and ultimately obtained an engagement as conductor from the Metropolitan Tramway Company. In this employment, the primary education he had enjoyed while young served him to good purpose, and he was soon promoted to the post of timekeeper. After some 2 years' careful saving, he collected sufficient money to buy a horse, hire a cab, and obtain his licence. At first he was greeted with many jibes and jeers from the older and more experienced hands, but fortune soon smiled on him in the person of a bricklayer. This labourer had inherited a sum of £1,300. His wife had been a washerwoman, and to quote the cabman's own words, nothing was too good for her, but she looked after all only a washerwoman. No more the lady, sir, than a coster's donkey is like the winner of the derby. This couple engaged him day after day, and their drives caused quite a sensation in the neighbourhoods they favoured with their presence. They rattled pence at the windows of the cab and threw out handfuls of money to the street urchins, who followed and cheered in their wake. They hailed their old friends as they passed them in the streets, insisted on giving them a drive to the nearest public house, where old acquaintance was recklessly drunk from foaming tankards. Knowing that they might always trust the cabman to see them safely home, if unable to guide their own steps, at last the bricklayer's mind became affected by the importance of his fortune. A mania seized him. He could not desist from making his will, and then altering it over and over again. Sometimes he even awoke in the middle of the night, sent for his cab, and insisted on being driven to his lawyer's in Chancery Lane, much to that grave gentleman's annoyance. The matter of the will was, however, soon settled by the money being all spent, and the cabman lost sight of these peculiar customers. But this momentary good fortune, coupled with much hard work, enabled my informant to purchase a cab and another horse. At this point of his career, he considered himself at liberty to indulge in the luxury of a wife, of whom he spoke in terms of high respect and affection. His horses were also the subject of his praise, and he sensibly boasted that they had always been serviceable hacks, and never above their work. There are among the London cab horses, he continued, some animals with their bluest blood of the turf in their veins, horses that have won piles of money for their heartless owners, and when, unless as racers, they have been sold for an old song. Some of these thoroughbreds are quiet, free, and useful. Others, like broken-down gentlemen, have squandered their strength on the turf. Let's have a bit of coffee. Altogether, there are 4,142 hansom cabs and 4,120 clarents, or four-wheeled cabs in London. These are managed by 10,474 drivers, and the honesty of these men is best proved by the fact that whereas 1,912 articles forgotten in the cabs were given up to the Lost Property Office in 1869, this number had increased in 1875 to 15,584. On the other hand, it will be said that if we may hope to recover a forgotten parcel, there is but little chance of escape from overcharge in the matter of the fare. This is undoubtedly true, but at the same time, the public are generally unaware that the cab driver is not exclusively responsible for these extortions. In this matter, the proprietors are more to blame, for they demand so high a rate of payment for the hire of their cabs that the drivers could never make a livelihood out of the legal fare. The charge for one hansom and two horses per day varies from 10 shillings to 12 shillings in the dull season, but there are no less than 8 rises in the course of the year. The first is in November, when the law courts open, and then an extra shilling is charged. A further rise of a shilling ensues during the Castle Show week. Then there is a lull till the opening of Parliament, when a third shilling is added to the price. Last Christmas Day, the cab drivers were compelled to pay 4 shillings extra for the hire of their cabs, but on Boxing Day the proprietors prudently refrained from any such demand. The effects of the season are calculated to influence the drivers, and many would doubtless be glad to profit by any dispute as an opportunity of taking a holiday on Boxing Day. Besides, the occasion is not very advantageous, as the majority of customers are drunken men, who may give much trouble, damage the cab, and from whom no redress is possible. From the meeting of Parliament up to the Derby Day, the price of cabs steadily increases, and on the race day itself, proprietors generally demand £1, 15 shillings to £2 before they allow one of their cabs to go to Epsom. The driver, it is known generally, asks £3, 3 shillings for the trip, and many have been the complaints respecting this apparently exorbitant charge. But when we remember that the driver is compelled to hand over about 2/3 of the sum to the cab owner, and has also to spend 8 to 10 shillings on the road, it will be admitted that his profits are not unreasonable. There is but one cabman known to have kept for several years a detailed account of every fare he has taken. He enters in his book where his customers are found, whether at a railway station, in the street, or while waiting at a cab stand, the amount actually received and what was the legal fare he should have charged. Armed with these statistics, he is able to prove that, according to his experience, the sums given by the public are every year nearer to the legal fare. At the same time, he is also able to prove that his income corresponds almost precisely with what he obtains over and above his fare, and that therefore the sums to which he is legally entitled only suffice to pay for the hire of a horse and cab, and would leave him nothing to live upon. The increased astuteness of the public, and their determination not to give much more than the fare, have reduced this cab driver's income from an average of £2 per week to only 30 shillings. Coffee. A cabman's income is subject to numerous fluctuations. The months of October and September are the worst in the whole year, and, but for the presence of innumerable visitors from the provinces and from America, many cab drivers would have to abandon business altogether during this season. Nor are visitors the best of customers. They seem to shrink from employing cabs except on very special occasions. The young men about town are infinitely preferred, and those who are just one step below what a cab driver described as the cream of society. If these gentlemen have no horses of their own, they console themselves by resorting on every possible occasion to the friendly expedient of the hansom. Then again, fares of this description do not often take the driver far from profitable neighbourhoods. The last and present year have, however, been exceptionally unfavourable, and many small proprietors were compelled to sell their horses and abandon business. Perhaps this accounts for the decrease in the number of fatal accidents, for there were only 87 persons killed in the streets during the year 1875, while the average for the previous 6 years amounted to 123 violent deaths. On the other hand, there was an increase of 136 more persons maimed and injured than during the previous year, the total being 2,704. But it would be unfair to blame the cabmen for this long list of casualties. The light carts, used for the most part by tradesmen, are responsible for the largest proportion of these accidents. Cab drivers who depend for their livelihood on their skill in manipulating the ribbons are naturally more careful and have more to lose should they injure an unwary pedestrian. The best season on record was that of the exhibition of 1851, notwithstanding the numerous events, the many attractive sensations. Many of them were mere cab drivers, or at best but small proprietors, when the first great exhibition was opened, and the money they made at that time enabled them to start on a larger scale. So many people had, however, visited London during the exhibition, and so much money had been spent that a reaction naturally ensued, and for the 2 following years, cabmen's fares were scarce and meagre. Those only who were not too elated by the golden receipts of 1851 and were able to weather the storm by dint of economy and work became the great proprietors of the present day. These are not, it is true, very numerous. It was estimated in 1874 that there were not more than 50 cab proprietors in London who possessed more than 20 cabs each. As a rule, 3 or 4 proprietors group together and occupy one mews, each man possessing 4 or 5 cabs. The 2 largest cab proprietors in London are, I believe, Mr. Thomas Gunn of Doughty Mews, Russell Square, and Mr. Tilling of Peckham. Westminster is often stated to be the chief haven of London cabmen, though till recently the quarter could only boast of 2 proprietors who possessed more than 20 cabs each. 2 large owners have now, however, moved to this quarter from Islington. In any case, whatever may be the number of cab owners in this locality, it is to the cab drivers of Westminster and Chelsea that the honour is due of having initiated a reform movement. After many private discussions, the Cab Drivers' Society was formed at a meeting held in Pimlico in April 1874. The Eleusis Club, King's Road, Chelsea, lent its hall to these pioneer organisers, and a most successful public meeting was held, which enabled the drivers to air their grievances for the first time. By the end of the year, the society comprised 2 branches, 158 members, and boasted of a capital amounting to £48, 9 shillings and 5.5 pence. A year later, this society had already become a formidable association. In December 1875, it numbered 13 branches and enrolled 1,658 members and possessed funds amounting to nearly £800. It had been represented and heartily welcomed at the great Parliament of Labour, the Trades Union Congress, and is now strong enough to espouse the cause of any cab driver who is unfairly treated by his employer. In this sense, some good has already been achieved by the society, but I must reserve further details concerning the men engaged in this familiar phase of street labour for a future chapter. A.S. So A.S. I think is probably C. Adolf Smith. Okay, let us read about Covent Garden Flowerwomen, and I'm going to have some coffee first. Okay. The metropolis of the vegetable world has class divisions of its own, and a special population depending for their livelihood on the business here transacted. By the side of the wealthy salesmen and wholesale purveyors of fruit, green stuff, and flowers, there are innumerable hangers-on, parasites of the flower world, who seek to pick up the few crumbs that must incidentally fall from the loaded boards and counters where so much is bought and sold. Where nature, as Charles Kenny puts it, empties forth her teeming lap filled with the choicest of produce, the poor may well hope to find some small assistance. Indeed, there seems to be something inexpressibly touching in the tendency of the poor to fall back on nature's gifts when reduced to the last extremity. The familiar sight of a poor woman holding a pale child in her arms and offering modest violets to the pedestrian is pregnant with a poetry which rags and dirt fail to obliterate. In exchange for nature's gifts, she seems to challenge human compassion. And shall the heart of man remain cold where the produce of field and garden are so bounteous and beautiful? Unfortunately, with the spread of civilization, nature seems to lose its hold, and artifice gains on almost every sphere of human endeavour. The fruits which the earth gives gratuitously have been converted into the property of a privileged few, and the pauperised street vendor must bargain and haggle before she can obtain the refuse flowers disdained by fashionable dealers. Even such simple flowers as the primrose and violet are now governed by the inexorable and iron laws of supply and demand. They are sold by auction and by contract. The poor, as it is customary in trade, paying in proportion a higher price for the worst goods. Nor is this all. The pure and most delicate flowers fade and bow their heads, as if with shame, in the unwholesome atmosphere of ballroom and theatre. To support such an ordeal, they must be drilled and trained, pierced and propped up with cruel wires, and made to look as stiff and unbending as the world of artifice they are called upon to adorn. How different is the Covent Garden of today, with its bustle and din, its wealth and pauperism, its artifices, its hothouse flowers and forced fruit, its camellias with wire stems, its exotics from far-off climes to the fir-spreading pastures, measuring, according to the old chronicle, some 7 acres in extent, where the abbots of Westminster buried those who died in their convent. In those days, vegetables were not only sold here, but grew on the spot, and the land, now so valuable, was considered to be worth an annual income of £6, 6 shillings and 8 pence, when given by the Crown to John Russell, Earl of Bedford, in 1552. Many and interesting stories attached to this celebrated spot, honoured by the daily presence and preference of some of the brightest lights of genius England has ever produced, but it is not my purpose to trace the history of the market. I have to deal rather with the group of women who may be seen daily standing by those ugly Tuscan pillars which Indigo Jones designed to ornament the church of St. Paul. Fire, it is true, destroyed the building in 1795, but the design unfortunately remained, and it was rebuilt after the old model. The Flowerwomen seem to follow a somewhat similar policy. When death takes one of the group away, a child has generally been reared to follow in her parents' footsteps, and the beat in front of the church is not merely the property of its present owners. It has been inherited from previous generations of flowerwomen. Now and then a stranger makes her appearance, probably during the most profitable season, but as a rule the same women may be seen standing on the spot from year's end to year's end, and the personages of the photograph are well known to nearly all who are connected with the market. By the side of the flowerwomen may be noted a familiar character, of whom it may truly be said, the tailor makes the man, for this individual is named not after his family, but after his clothes. Corduroy generally refused to give his real name, and at last it was conjectured that some mystery overhung his birth. I have, however, only been able to ascertain that he worked for many years in the brickfields, and on his health-giving way came to the market in search of any little job that might bring him a few pence. In the early morning he stood and watched over the costermongers' barrows while they attended the sales. In the daytime he was assiduous in opening carriage doors, and gallantly held out his arm to prevent ladies' dresses brushing the wheels, while the evening found him loitering about in the vicinity of public houses, always in quest of a treat or of pence. He is now, however, missing, and as he suffered severely from asthma, it is supposed that he has sought shelter from the inclement weather in the workhouse infirmary. His friends and associates, the flowerwomen, are also greatly dependent on the weather, for it is not only influences the price of the flowers, but the wet reduces the number of loiterers, who are their best customers. Their income therefore varies considerably according to the season. In the summer months, more than £1 net profits have been cleared in a week, but in bad weather these women have often returned home with less than a shilling as a result of 12 hours exposure to the rain. They arrive at the market before the break of day and are still faithful to their post late in the afternoon. Those who have children teach them to take their places during the less busy hours and thus obtain a little relaxation, but at best the life is a hard one, which is the more painful as the women are generally entirely dependent on their own exertion for their existence. The flower vendor, for instance, standing beside Corduroy, has to provide not only for herself but for an invalid husband, who, when at his best, can only help her to prepare the nosegays and button flowers. She boasts, however, that in this art he excels all competitors, and certainly we have noticed many customers give preference to her flowers. Her son brings his share of grist to the mill by earning pence as an independent bootblack, but how different is the position of this woman to that of Isabel, the favourite flower girl of the Paris Jockey Club. Complimented by almost all the crowned heads of Europe, in receipt of £400 a year from the Jockey Club, living in a most luxurious apartment, endowed with a fine collection of diamonds, besporting herself in a neat little brougham. This notorious Parisian flower girl cannot be compared, morally speaking, with the rough and simple woman whose portrait is before the reader. Notwithstanding her ample income, it is well known that Isabel refused to give £30 a year to save her mother from starvation, and her meanness caused so great a scandal that the Jockey Club withdrew its patronage from her, and the popular favourite fell into merited disgrace. The Flowerwomen of Covent Garden are not gifted with the artistic instinct and coquettish charms of Isabel, but warmer hearts beat beneath the hodden grey than ever stirred the black and yellow satin of the Jockey Club. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, and maybe we'll have another look through this really interesting book in another video. So this is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and thank you so much for popping by, and I shall see you very, very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye.